Aria had known exile was coming long before they spoke the words. She had seen it in their eyes, the quiet judgment that coiled beneath every cautious glance. The elders had deliberated in hushed tones for days, yet she felt certain of the outcome from the moment she caught wind of their first assembly. In the Valen culture, to be a widow without a bond was to invite suspicion and distrust, for tradition dictated that no Valen should survive alone for long. Yet Aria had survived, and that survival was a crime in itself, marked by superstition and fear. They gave her no chance to defend herself. The sentence was abrupt and final: exile to the frozen wasteland of Valtor Prime, that icy and unforgiving domain on the outermost edge of their star system. It was a region of chilling winds, endless plains of permafrost, and storms so fierce they could strip flesh from bone. She was cast out without mercy, taking only a small ration pack and the meager garments on her back. Worst of all, she had to bring her child, her beloved son Rael, only 6 cycles old, who clung to her hand as they forced her away from the spired city. Her breath trembled as she tightened her grip on Rael. The biting cold gnawed at her skin the moment the towering gates of the city sealed behind her. A final hiss of hydraulics, a groan of ancient metal, and the only home she had ever known vanished from sight. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, and no one to call friend. The frosty wind tore at her clothes, threatened to devour her warmth in mere minutes. She gathered Rael close to her breast and trudged forward, the twin suns above casting pale, ghostly light upon the crystalline terrain. Legends said that if you listened close enough, you could hear the bones of the ancients singing through the ice, but Aria heard no such melody, only the howling gale that battered her senses. Each step into the barren wild felt as though it might be her last, yet for Rael's sake, she pressed on, refusing to yield to the hopelessness that weighed upon her heart. Night fell swiftly on Valtor Prime, and the temperature plummeted with astonishing speed. All around her, sweeping plains of ice stretched into the horizon, mirroring the vastness of the starry sky above. The fractured glaciers caught the moon's pale glow, casting strange reflections across the dark. Aria found what little shelter she could in the hollowed trunk of an ancient petrified tree, its bark harder than stone and riddled with hidden recesses. It was hardly enough to keep them warm, but it offered a break from the relentless wind, and that small mercy was invaluable. She took off her own overcoat, as threadbare as it was, and draped it over Rael's trembling shoulders. The boy's face, chalky and drawn, held quiet tears that froze almost as soon as they were shed. Aria's heart clenched. She drew him close, rubbing warmth into his tiny hands, her breath crystallizing in the air. She pressed her lips to his forehead, silently praying to the ancient gods she was never certain she believed in. At midnight, the temperature dropped further still, and Aria feared Rael would not survive until dawn. The meager rations would do little to sustain them, and she felt a cold dread coil in her stomach as she realized that even if they survived the night, their resources would run out in a matter of days. No rescue would come. The Valen had made that clear. They did not intend for her to return. This was a death sentence, a cruel severing of ties. Yet Aria refused to let despair consume her. Somewhere, buried beneath layers of desperation, hope still flickered. She recalled tales, whispers, really, of the new settlers from distant worlds who had ventured to the outskirts of Valtor Prime in search of rare minerals. Among those settlers were rumored to be humans, a species said to be ruthless, cunning, and entirely alien to Valen sensibilities. The mere thought sent a shiver through her, but the stories also said humans were resilient. If one was out here, perhaps survival was possible. With the dawn came a pale sky and swirling gusts of snow. Rael's breathing was shallow, his small frame racked by shivers. Aria knew she had to act. Clinging to the trunk's edge, she prayed for any sign of life beyond the wasteland. She heard only the lament of the wind. Hours passed, and each step further into the glacial plains felt like a slow surrender to forces beyond her control. The rations were almost gone, her clothes hardly more than rags by day's end. In a moment of raw desperation, she tore strips from her own garments to start a small fire. The friction from stone and metal shards sparked a flame, and though it was feeble, the warmth brought some color back to Rael's cheeks. She watched her own clothes burn, the heat from their destruction offering a fleeting kindness. She felt a pang of sorrow as the last ember died down, knowing she was now more exposed than ever. Yet, seeing Rael's eyes flutter open with renewed life was worth any sacrifice. Her momentary solace shattered when she spotted a towering silhouette moving through the ice and snow, lumbering across the horizon. Her heart hammered against her chest, for she knew well the danger that lurked in the frozen wilderness. Tundra beasts, predators that roamed the wastes, were said to be unstoppable. Their shaggy fur and colossal jaws made them lords of this domain, and she had nothing but a makeshift spear fashioned from a tree branch. The creature drew closer, its breath steaming in the frigid air, and Aria placed herself between it and Rael. Fear threatened to loosen her grip, but her love for her child fueled her courage. Just as the beast lowered its massive head, preparing to charge, an unexpected flash of movement dashed across the ice. A stranger, clad in thick protective gear, wielding a strange mechanical device that glowed with a sizzling blue energy. Aria's eyes widened as she recognized the figure as human, or so she believed. She had never seen one in the flesh, yet the descriptions she had heard throughout her life, the tall, sinewy frame, the angular features, the startling eyes that shone with fierce intelligence, matched the being who now stood between her and certain death. "Get down," the stranger shouted, his voice carrying against the howling wind. Aria hesitated, uncertain if his words were meant to aid her or seal her fate. But when he brandished his weapon and charged at the snarling beast, she realized she had no choice. She pulled Rael to the ground, covering his small body with her own, and waited. A burst of searing light tore through the air, followed by the foul stench of scorched fur. The beast howled, rearing back on its hind legs, its roar trembling through the ice. The stranger fired again, the device unleashing some form of concentrated plasma, scattering sparks across the glacier. This time, the beast stumbled, its bulk crashing into a slab of ice before it collapsed with a thunderous finality. Silence descended, broken only by the howling wind and the hiss of steam from the weapon's muzzle. Aria dared to peek, expecting the man to turn on her. Instead, he moved cautiously toward them, keeping his weapon lowered. She saw his face then, half covered by a frost-laced visor, but the concern in his eyes was unmistakable. "You'll freeze out here," he said, each word punctuated by short, visible bursts of breath. "There's an outpost nearby, shelter, heat. Come with me, or stay and die." His tone was blunt, lacking any trace of the malice or cruelty that Valen lore ascribed to humans. Aria felt a swirl of emotions, fear, hope, uncertainty. She turned to look at Rael, who clung to her with wide eyes. Then she gazed at the stranger again, searching for answers in his expression. Finally, she gave a small nod. She had no choice. The human introduced himself as Kieran once they reached the outpost. It was a utilitarian structure, low to the ground, built of reinforced steel that braved the worst the frozen winds could hurl at it. Inside, heaters hummed with gentle efficiency, and Aria felt an almost overwhelming relief as warmth spread through her limbs. Rael, his lips still tinged with blue, began to breathe more steadily. Kieran didn't speak much at first, offering only gestures of kindness, a spare blanket, a cup of steaming broth, and a place by the heater where Aria could sit with Rael. For her part, Aria found herself momentarily speechless, her mind reeling from the events of the day. Here, in the heart of a place she never believed she would see, she found solace. It defied everything she had been taught about humans. "You're Valen," Kieran observed quietly, his gaze lingering on Aria's intricate facial markings, small arc-like lines that adorned her cheeks. They were the trademark of her people, signifying lineage and social standing. "I'm sorry," he added, as if he already knew about the stigma attached to her exile. Aria searched his eyes, puzzled by his sympathy. You know my people?" she asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion. He nodded, removing his visor. "Yes," he replied softly. "We've had dealings with them. Not always peaceful, I'll admit. But I've learned enough to know you weren't born for this place. You and your child could never survive out there." Her eyes fell, a surge of shame flooding her. She wondered what he must think of her, an outcast carrying a child through the frozen plains. But Kieran said nothing more, only rummaged through a supply chest to find medical salves and bandages, offering them to her with a gentle kindness that caught her off guard. In those early hours under the harsh fluorescent lights of the outpost, the first seeds of trust were sown. Aria tried to hide the trembling of her hands as she administered the salve to Rael's wind-chapped skin, and Kieran noticed. His gaze was compassionate, yet she sensed a quiet strength that she found oddly reassuring. As minutes stretched into hours, and hours into days, Aria discovered that Kieran was not the cruel savage she had expected. He was methodical in his survival tactics, resourceful in scavenging from the environment, and fiercely protective of the outpost he claimed as his own. She learned he was a surveyor, sent on a contract to gauge Valtor Prime's mineral wealth. He had chosen this remote region because the scans indicated a potential motherlode of rare deposits beneath the ice. Though his mission demanded that he trek across the frozen land, checking sensors and drilling rigs, he always returned, bringing with him new findings, scraps of meat from local fauna that he assured her were safe to eat once properly cooked, and any salvageable material that might be of use. He even brought back more blankets, albeit worn and patched, for Rael's bed. Soon, Aria found herself relying on Kieran for more than just warmth and shelter. She realized how little she truly knew of the world beyond her city's walls. Her understanding of wilderness survival had been gleaned from children's cautionary tales, but Kieran's knowledge came from years of hard living on frontier planets. He taught her how to reinforce the outpost's entrance with makeshift ice barricades, how to filter water from melted snow to avoid contaminants, and how to recognize the patterns of the storms so they could prepare in advance. In time, a new routine emerged. Mornings were spent checking the outpost's power cells, ensuring that the solar arrays perched on the roof remained operational despite the ice buildup. Afternoons, when the storms sometimes calmed, Aria would venture out with Kieran to gather more firewood from pockets of petrified forests. Rael, wrapped in every scrap of clothing they could spare, stayed inside, safe and warm. In the evenings, they would gather near the outpost's heating coil, sharing what scant food they had. It was during these quiet hours that Aria slowly let her guard down, piece by piece. Kieran, for his part, began to share more about himself. He was from a colony on the far side of the galaxy, a place called Terra Nova, established by humans centuries ago. He spoke of wide green fields and distant mountains, of cities built on the rubble of ancient civilizations, reclaimed from the ravages of war. His voice resonated with longing, and Aria sensed a spirit of wandering in him, as though he had never truly found his place. "Why did you come here?" she asked one evening, once Rael had fallen asleep. The child's quiet breathing was a soothing lull in the background as the wind howled just beyond the reinforced walls. Kieran exhaled slowly, gazing into the orange glow of the heater. "Because it was a job," he said, a hint of regret in his tone. "And because sometimes, when you're running from your past, the most isolated corner of the galaxy seems like salvation." She nodded, understanding more than he might guess, for her own past had led her here too, albeit by force. The lines of fate, she mused, often wove strangers together in the most unexpected ways. Over the next few weeks, a subtle bond began to form between them. They were still wary, of course. Aria never forgot the stories she had grown up with, tales of human cruelty, atrocities committed during territorial wars. And Kieran was no fool. He knew trust was hard-earned. But shared hardship has a way of forging alliances that might otherwise remain unspoken. Despite their progress, the specter of danger never truly receded. One late afternoon, as a storm raged outside, a deafening roar echoed across the plains. Aria rushed to the small window, heart pounding, only to see the looming figure of another tundra beast prowling nearby. This one seemed even larger than the last, its fur an ashen white, blending with the snow. Kieran readied his weapon, and they waited, hearts thundering, as the beast sniffed around the outpost walls. The tension lasted an agonizing half-hour before the beast finally moved on, its bellowing roars fading into the distance. Aria let out a shaky breath, and Kieran lowered the weapon slowly, relief washing over both of them. "It won't be the last," he said gravely. "And one of these days, it might bring its pack." Aria swallowed hard, dreading what that would mean for Rael. They had no illusions about the peril surrounding them. Human or alien, the frozen land did not discriminate. One misstep, and they would all be as lifeless as the frigid air itself. But the threat of tundra beasts was not the only peril lurking in the distance. One morning, while Kieran was out gathering supplies, Aria noticed movement on the horizon. At first, she assumed it might be Kieran returning or some harmless drifting snow, but as the shapes grew more defined, she saw silhouettes reminiscent of Valen warriors. Her blood froze in her veins. She recognized the armor, the stance, the menace that radiated from their posture. They were enforcers, the very group responsible for her exile, and they traveled in a formation that suggested a single purpose: hunting her. Her mind reeled. Had they come to drag her back? She doubted they would show any mercy. More likely, they were here to erase her entirely, to ensure she never returned to the city alive. She had heard rumors that the enforcers took no prisoners. If they found her, it would mean death for her and Rael as well. She frantically sealed the outpost door, hoping it would mask their presence, then rushed to gather Rael in her arms. Quieting his soft, curious questions, she crouched near the heater, her heart racing so loudly she feared the enforcers would hear it through the walls. Hours seemed to slip by in agonizing slowness, but eventually, the shifting silhouettes vanished, swallowed by the haze of blowing snow. When Kieran finally returned, exhaustion etched into his features, Aria met him at the entrance with trembling hands. "They're here," she whispered, voice tight with fear. "Valen enforcers." His expression hardened, and she saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. He didn't question or waste time with reassurances. Instead, he calmly set down his supplies and began fortifying the walls with additional barriers, including the metal siding he had salvaged from a wrecked skiff. Aria watched as he worked, her gratitude mingling with apprehension. She wondered if his willingness to help would cost him his life. That night, sleep was scarce for them both. Aria dozed fitfully, images of the enforcers prowling outside haunting her every moment. She woke at dawn to find Kieran already awake, running diagnostics on his weapon. She caught the hint of resolution in his face, and a new wave of emotion crept over her. She had not asked for this, but she could not deny a small voice inside her heart that felt a glimmer of safety in his presence. 2 days later, the enforcers returned, and this time, they came straight for the outpost. The first warning was a sudden blast that rocked the building, sending metal plates clattering to the floor. Aria grabbed Rael and rushed him to the safest corner, behind reinforced crates. Kieran took position by a narrow firing slit he had cut into the wall. Shouts in Valen language echoed through the snowstorm outside, and Aria braced herself. She knew they would not negotiate or spare her. Another blast struck, warping the steel door. Then came the hum of energy weapons. Kieran returned fire, aiming precisely through the slit. Shouts turned to screams, and she heard the sound of heavy bodies hitting the ice. But the enforcers were not so easily deterred. One of them, a towering figure clad in the black insignia of a commander, stepped forward with an energy shield raised. Kieran's blasts dissipated harmlessly against it, scattering sparks in all directions. The commander's voice boomed in the storm, commanding his subordinates to flank the outpost. Aria heard metal groan somewhere on the side. They were trying to breach through a weaker section of the wall. Kieran cursed under his breath, hastily adjusting the power settings on his weapon. With a piercing whine, the next shot he fired glowed a vivid turquoise, smashing into the commander's shield with enough force to send him stumbling. For a moment, it seemed the shield flickered, but then it stabilized. "We can't keep them out forever," Kieran said, his eyes darting to Aria. "Take Rael and hide in the storage hatch." "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't leave you here alone. We can." A second blast cut her off, more violent than before. The outpost's lights flickered. Sheets of metal peeled away from the rear section, letting in an onrush of freezing air. Snow swirled inside, stinging her eyes. She pulled Rael closer. Kieran grit his teeth and fired again, this time striking an enforcer creeping around the side. He collapsed in a spray of sparks, but more were coming, their footfalls pounding across the ice. The commander roared an order, and 2 more blasts rocked the outpost. Aria felt panic rise in her chest. She had never wielded a weapon of such power, but if Kieran fell, she and Rael would be doomed. Summoning her courage, She grabbed a small sidearm from Kieran's gear stash. Her heart thundered as she moved to the gaping hole in the side of the outpost. There, she spotted an enforcer climbing through twisted metal. Their eyes locked, his wide with surprise, hers bright with desperate resolve. She pulled the trigger, and a bolt of ruddy energy speared through the enforcer's torso. He toppled backward without a sound. A surge of adrenaline sharpened her senses. She had just killed a man, one of her own people, and yet she felt no remorse, only an overwhelming need to protect Rail. The wind howled, carrying the smell of scorched metal and ozone. She heard Kieran cry out as a blast grazed his arm, sending him staggering. "Aria!" he yelled, trying to maintain his footing. The commander, still shielded, advanced steadily, flanked by two more enforcers. Every beat of Aria's heart seemed to echo in her skull. She knew if the enforcers reached them, there would be no mercy. She looked at Kieran, who was panting, blood staining the sleeve of his jacket, the ice at his feet turning a faint pink. Then she remembered the outpost's main power core. A wave of realization crashed over her. If she could overload the core, they might be able to force the enforcers to retreat. But it was risky. If it exploded, they could all die in the blast. Still, they had no other option. She scrambled to the central console, her fingers flying over the archaic interface. Kieran realized her intent. "Aria, you'll kill us all if it goes critical," he shouted, firing another shot at an approaching enforcer. She gritted her teeth. "I'll give us a window, just enough to disable them. Then we run." Time seemed to slow. Each breath felt like an eternity as Aria manipulated the reactor's failsafes. Alarms blared, and the outpost lights flickered between harsh yellow and blood red. Outside, the commander sensed something was amiss. He shouted for his troops to fall back, but it was too late. A blinding flare lit the interior as the power core surged. Kieran grabbed Rail, shielding the child with his body. Aria dove behind a metal crate, heat washing over her. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and an ear-splitting whine tore through the air. Then, with a deafening crack, the energy wave burst outward, knocking the commander and his enforcers off their feet. Their shields sputtered and died. Aria felt the walls buckle, the outpost shuddering under the strain. When the dust settled, the outpost was on the brink of collapse, but the enforcers were scattered, dazed, some unconscious on the snow. The commander staggered, his shield generator ruined, his weapon lost. For a moment, their eyes met through the haze of ice and debris. She saw raw hatred in his gaze, but also a flicker of fear. Kieran seized the advantage, staggering out into the open, weapon trained on the commander. "Leave," he growled, voice seething with determination. "Leave now, or the next shot ends you." The commander's face twisted with fury. He gathered his battered soldiers and retreated into the swirling gale, their silhouettes soon swallowed by the horizon. Aria let out a long, ragged breath, sinking to her knees. Rail stirred, unharmed but frightened. Kieran, his sleeves soaked with blood, slumped against the wall. Relief warred with horror at what they had just done. They had driven off the enforcers, but at great cost. The outpost was badly damaged, its power core nearly destroyed. They were left vulnerable in the face of another storm, or worse, another assault. But in that moment, Aria felt something profound settle in her chest. She had faced her past and survived. She had protected her child, with Kieran's help. He had risked his life to defend them, refusing to let her be taken, refusing to submit to the fear that might have kept him safe. She realized then that the line between friend and foe was not so simple, and that the prejudices she had grown up with had blinded her to the quiet heroism of this human. Gently, she moved to Kieran's side, helping him ease down onto a makeshift cot. He winced, but tried to smile through the pain. "I'll patch this up," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Just rest. You did enough." He nodded, breath unsteady. "We're safe for now." Days passed as Aria mended Kieran's wound. The outpost remained precarious, its life support systems hobbled by the overload. She had to ration the remaining power cells to maintain a minimal level of heat. It wasn't enough to keep the entire structure warm, so they clustered in the central chamber, huddled beneath layers of blankets. For the first time in her life, Aria felt that she had a choice in her destiny. She could have run after the battle, but she stayed, tending Kieran, caring for Rail, piecing together the battered outpost as best she could. Their small group was a family forged by necessity, tempered by adversity, and sustained by a growing sense of camaraderie that neither she nor Kieran would openly name yet. She found herself studying him as he slept, noticing how the tension faded from his brow, how the small scar above his eyebrow caught the dim glow of the emergency lamp. He was so alien, so different from her people, yet he was also the only anchor she had in this world. The quiet realization that she wanted him to live, wanted him to remain by her side, filled her with a mixture of warmth and trepidation. She saw how he looked at Rael, not as a burden, but as a child deserving of protection. She noticed the gentleness in his hands, despite the calluses of a hard life. When Kieran finally woke free of fever, he found Aria reading an old Terran manual on emergency field repairs. She glanced up and offered him a grateful smile. "How do you feel?" she asked softly, setting aside the manual. "Like I tried to wrestle a starship engine," he muttered, pressing a hand to his bandaged arm. "But I'll survive." She nodded. "I'm glad," she whispered, her cheeks warming despite the chill. He looked around the damaged outpost, taking in the patchwork repairs, the dwindling supplies, and Rael curled up asleep. "So what now?" he asked, his gaze lingering on her. "We can't stay here forever," Aria said. "The outpost won't hold up against another attack or a major storm. We need to find a safer place, maybe beyond the mountains to the south. You said your scans indicated a large deposit there. Perhaps we can find shelter in the caves." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that might work. There's a chain of geothermal vents near that region, warmer ground, fewer tundra beasts, and hopefully no more enforcers." A faint, hopeful spark glimmered between them. They had survived what seemed insurmountable. Perhaps they could endure whatever came next. They began preparing for the journey, gathering what salvageable equipment they had, packing the ration packs, and carefully bundling Rael in every layer of warmth they could spare. Their departure came just in time. A mere day after they left, a ferocious storm descended, and they watched from a distance as the outpost was swallowed by roiling winds. Sheets of metal tore free, carried off into the endless white expanse. Aria felt a pang of loss, for that battered structure had been their haven. But Kieran laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and she found the courage to move on. They traveled slowly across the frozen plains, each step treacherous on the ice. Kieran led the way, scanning for hidden crevasses with a portable sensor. Aria stayed close, steadying Rael, who marveled at the vistas of swirling snow, occasionally pointing out shapes in the distance. She urged him to stay quiet, for they could never be sure when a predator or a patrol might appear. One day, they encountered the footprints of a tundra beast, massive indentations that dwarfed even Kieran's large boots. Another day, they discovered the wreckage of an old Valen transport, half buried in the ice. Kieran salvaged a few parts, but no survivors. The journey was perilous, yet each evening they found some form of shelter, a hollow in the ice, a weathered rock outcropping, where they huddled together for warmth. As the days stretched into weeks, Aria found herself relying on Kieran not just for survival, but for solace. They spoke of small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, the different constellations visible from their homeworlds. These quiet conversations carried them through long nights, forging an intimacy neither had expected. Aria realized with a start that her fear of humans had melted away, replaced by a blossoming trust in this particular man, this quiet protector who had become essential to her life. Then the day arrived when they reached the mountainous region. Jagged peaks rose from the ice, their slopes wrapped in ribbons of steam from the geothermal vents below. The air was slightly warmer, and they felt a gentle heat emanating from cracks in the rock. Following Kieran's sensor readings, they soon discovered a network of caves stretching beneath the mountains, carved by centuries of volcanic activity. Here, they made camp. The caverns glowed with a strange luminescence, fed by fungi that clung to the damp walls. Pools of warm water collected in natural basins, and Aria felt relief wash over her as Rael dipped his fingers into the liquid, giggling at the strange warmth it provided. Kieran quickly set up a temporary habitat, using what materials they had salvaged. This would be their new home, at least for a while. The sense of relative security allowed them to relax, if only slightly. Kieran began surveying the adjacent tunnels, setting up beacons for navigation. Aria explored cautiously, discovering pockets of crystal formations that refracted the dim light, painting the walls with dancing colors. She also found remnants of old mining equipment, possibly left by human prospectors or an ancient Valen operation. Their sense of calm was fleeting, however. One afternoon, as Aria gathered edible fungi near the cave entrance, she heard voices drifting on the wind. She froze, heart pounding. Were the enforcers back? Had they tracked her here? She hurried into the cavern, alerting Kieran, who immediately armed himself and took a vantage point near a narrow crevice. Minutes passed in tense silence, until a group of 5 figures emerged into view. They were not Valen. A quick glance told Aria they were humans, like Kieran, but clad in heavier armor, their faces hard and suspicious. One of them, seemingly the leader, carried a formidable rifle strapped to his back. Kieran tensed, recognizing the uniforms. "They're from the mining corporation," he whispered. "Contractors, probably. Could be dangerous, but let's see if they're here to negotiate or chase us out." With caution, Kieran stepped from behind the rock, his weapon lowered but in hand. Aria hovered behind him, tension radiating from every muscle. The leader of the newcomers spotted them and raised a hand, signaling his team to stop. "Identify yourself," the man barked, his voice echoing in the cavern. "Kieran Lawson, independent surveyor. Contracted for mineral exploration," Kieran replied calmly, though his stance was guarded. "This is Aria and her child. We've set up a temporary shelter here." The man's gaze flickered to Aria and Rael, narrowing slightly at the sight of a Valen woman and child. "This region is under corporate claim. You're trespassing." Aria felt dread coil in her stomach. If these humans decided to drive them out, where would they go? The man's tone suggested no desire for diplomacy. However, Kieran's expression hardened, and he seemed ready to stand his ground. "I have a permit for exploration in this area," Kieran said. "Check your records. Contract #Z47-14. The man's second-in-command fiddled with a handheld device, scanning Kieran's ID chip. A moment later, his stern features twisted into annoyance. "He's telling the truth, boss." Grumbling, the leader looked back at Kieran. "Fine, but the company doesn't want squatters. What about them?" His eyes flicked toward Aria and Rael. "They're with me," Kieran said firmly, making no effort to mask his protective stance. "They have a right to be here under my protection. If you've got a problem with that, you can take it up with the Territorial Council." The leader paused, eyeing Kieran's bandaged arm, then Aria's determined gaze. Perhaps he saw the resolve in her eyes, or perhaps he recognized that starting a confrontation here, with limited backup and uncertain terrain, was unwise. He spat onto the cave floor. "Suit yourself, but don't say we didn't warn you. Conditions here are harsh, resources limited. You want to drag a kid around? That's your funeral." With that, the group moved on, deeper into the caves, though their unfriendly attitude lingered in the air like a bad taste. Aria exhaled once they were gone, her body sagging with relief. Another threat averted, but how many more would come? In the following days, they encountered the mining contractors several times, always keeping a cautious distance. Though tensions remained, no open conflict erupted. Kieran and Aria continued to build a life in the geothermal caverns, collecting resources and establishing a semblance of comfort. Even Rael began to laugh again, delighting in the strange glowing algae that shimmered in the warm waters. During this period of relative calm, Aria found her heart increasingly drawn to Kieran. The line between gratitude and genuine affection blurred, shaped by the knowledge he had risked everything for her and Rael. She recalled the moment he stood between them and the Valen enforcers, the unwavering resolve in his eyes, the unspoken promise that he would protect them. She realized with sudden clarity that she could no longer deny her feelings. He had become more than an ally. He had become dear to her. One evening, after Rael had fallen asleep, she and Kieran sat beside a small fire near the cave wall. The crackling flames cast flickering shadows that danced across the stone, and the low rumble of distant geothermal activity hummed in the background. Aria turned to him, heart pounding. "Kieran," she began softly. I want to thank you for everything. You saved us, more times than I can count. You've given us hope when we had none." He met her gaze, his features gentling. "Aria, you don't owe me anything. If anything, I should apologize that I couldn't do more." She reached out, placing a trembling hand over his. No. Without you, Rael and I would be dead. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us a chance. The warmth of his hand under hers felt electric, stirring a tumult of emotions. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the shadow of loneliness that mirrored her own. In that moment, everything else fell away. The hatred of the enforcers, the cold of the wasteland, the looming threat of the mining contractors, and only the quiet hush of two souls finding solace in each other remained. Slowly, gently, Kieran leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. You're free now, he whispered. They can't hurt you anymore. She closed her eyes, letting his breath warm her lips. In the hush that followed, it felt as though the entire universe paused, granting them a single perfect moment. Her heart fluttered with a quiet joy she had never known, and she allowed herself to imagine a future not dictated by fear or tradition, but by the simple, profound power of choice. Days turned into weeks, and though life in the geothermal caves was far from easy, Aria found it increasingly rich. She taught Rael to read from Kieran's old datapads, explaining the wonders of distant star systems and the diversity of life forms that populated the galaxy. Kieran showed Rael how to navigate the tunnels without getting lost, turning each excursion into a game of echoes and hidden markings. The child's laughter echoed through the caverns, a sweet sound of hope that dispelled the darkness of their exile. And in that laughter, Aria saw a flicker of what family could truly be, not a forced arrangement or rigid tradition, but a bond nurtured by choice and compassion. Yet, the memory of the Valen enforcers loomed. Aria knew they might try again. She also knew that one day, Kieran's contract would end, and he would have to decide whether to leave Valtor Prime or stay. Part of her dreaded his departure, for she had come to realize she could not bear to lose him. Another part of her longed for a new beginning, perhaps on another world, one where she and Rael could walk freely without fear of persecution. Eventually, the cold season on Valtor Prime began to wane, an almost imperceptible shift, but one Kieran's instruments detected in temperature and atmospheric data. If they wanted to leave the planet, the upcoming months would be the safest window before the next cycle of brutal storms arrived. The question of whether to go or stay hung in the air, unspoken yet pressing. That decision was forced one morning when the Valen enforcers reappeared, this time at the edge of the mountain pass. Scouts spotted them first, human miners who had formed a tenuous alliance with Kieran, exchanging minimal supplies and warnings for safe passage through the caves. The moment the alert reached them, Aria felt her blood run cold. They've come for us, she whispered, dread sinking in her stomach. Kieran's jaw clenched, and he checked his weapon, still not fully recovered from the outpost battle. Then we'll do what we must, he said resolutely. However, fate had other plans. The miners, not eager for a conflict that could jeopardize their operations, confronted the Valen at the pass. A tense standoff ensued, with neither side willing to back down. While the two groups glared at each other, Kieran and Aria made a daring decision, to use this distraction to slip away from Valtor Prime entirely. They worked quickly, packing only the essentials. Aria gathered everything vital for Rael's well-being, medicine, clothes, the precious few keepsakes she had left. Kieran readied a small shuttle he had purchased through black market deals, stored in a hidden alcove near the mountains. The vessel was old and temperamental, but it should be enough to carry them out of the atmosphere and rendezvous with a trade ship that periodically orbited Valtor Prime. We have to hurry, Kieran urged, carefully placing Rael inside the shuttle's cramped interior. Aria nodded, casting one last look at the caves. This place had been their sanctuary, but it was no longer safe. They ignited the shuttle's engines just as distant sounds of conflict echoed through the rocky terrain. The Valen enforcers had likely realized Aria's presence. The miners, outnumbered, would not hold them for long. With shaking hands, Kieran launched the craft into the sky. The shuttle rattled and groaned under the strain, but it rose, parting the swirling clouds as it climbed toward the upper atmosphere. Aria held Rael close, her heart pounding as she watched the planet's surface recede. The swirling storms, the jagged mountains, the endless plains of ice. All of it became a distant blur. Tears welled in her eyes, not solely from fear, but from the bittersweet relief of leaving behind the land of her exile. For so long, Valtor Prime had been a sentence of death. Now, it became a memory, a testament to the bonds they had forged in its icy grip. The shuttle broke through into the silent vastness of space, the black expanse glittering with stars. Kieran exhaled, shoulders sagging with exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," he murmured, looking to Aria. "We're free." She smiled, warmth flooding her chest despite the cosmic chill outside. "Yes," she whispered, glancing down at Rael, who gazed wide-eyed at the stars. "We are free." Within a few hours, they approached a refueling station orbiting Valtor Prime. A trade vessel was docked there, scheduled to depart within the day. Kieran used the last of his credits to secure passage, forging new identification papers for Aria and Rael. The staff barely asked questions. Frontier stations were notoriously lax, and credits spoke louder than words. Once on board the trade ship, Aria felt an immense sense of relief, yet a new uncertainty loomed. Where would they go now? She had no home to return to, no family or clan to welcome her. But as she caught Kieran's eye across the ship's cramped corridor, she realized she was no longer alone. For the first time, her destiny was her own to shape, guided by her love for Rael, and now, by her deepening bond with Kieran as well. They found a corner in the cargo hold where they could rest, leaning against stacked crates. Rael slept curled in a nest of blankets. Kieran pressed a hand gently to Aria's cheek. "We'll find a place, somewhere safe. Terra Nova, or one of the new colonies. Somewhere we can start over." She nodded, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes, though they were tears of gratitude, not sorrow. I never thought I could have this," she admitted, voice trembling. "A life not defined by tradition or fear, but by what I choose." "Thank you." He stroked a stray lock of her hair away from her face. "We'll make it, Aria," he promised softly. "All of us, together." She closed her eyes, savoring the moment, the gentle hum of the ship's engines beneath them. The weight of her past still lingered, but it no longer suffocated her. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had gained. As the trade ship disengaged from the orbital station, its engines roared to life. Aria felt a subtle shift, a lurch that signaled the beginning of faster-than-light travel. Before her, the stars stretched into luminous lines, the darkness folding around them as they slipped into hyperspace. Kieran's arm tightened around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, heart steady, her son cradled between them. And thus, under the silent watch of distant galaxies, Aria realized that hope was never truly lost. It flickered in the harshest conditions, a single spark against the black. In choosing to trust, to love, and to embrace the unexpected bond with a human she had once feared, she reclaimed her life. With Rael's hand wrapped in hers, and Kieran's warmth beside her, she looked forward to the unknown horizon, daring for the first time to believe that a happy ending was not a distant legend, but a living possibility, shaped by her own will, and by the quiet bravery of a man who chose compassion over prejudice.